Hey everyone, hope everyone's doing well and staying safe these days. So I definitely do have another motherboard review here for you. This wonderful piece of hardware here is the ASUS ROG Z690 motherboard here. This is actually the DDR4 variant, not the DDR5 variant. There's actually two variants here. If you're actually interested in the DDR5, that's also available for you as well too. With memory prices being a little weird on DDR5, you can understand motherboard makers actually making the different variants for both memory chips here. So here we have the DDR4 variant, and let's go ahead and pop this motherboard into a case, take a look at the BIOS, get it installed, and take a look at all the other goodies that it comes with. Come along. Just before I go ahead and get this unboxed, go ahead and take a look at the box itself. We can actually see here some details on that. Nice little picture of the motherboard here, the Wi-Fi antenna, and of course some other details down here regarding this particular motherboard. The socket, CPU, all the ports are included. What memory this uses is obviously the DDR4 version. There is also a DDR5 version as well too, which I don't believe is ever so much not so expensive, but obviously the memory chips does definitely change that. All the expansion slots available. The chipset, obviously the Z690 chipset for Intel's 12th generation CPUs. All of the storage slots here for NVMe. Looks like 6 SATA slots as well too. And of course the form factor, just your usual details. So let's go ahead and pop this open. Right over here, it looks like we do have the Wi-Fi antenna. ASUS seems to always put the little Wi-Fi antenna here. This is the one you actually screw onto the back and has this little base plate. We'll go ahead and take a look at that in just a moment. And let's go ahead and take this motherboard out. Basically the cardboard within a cardboard box here, which is actually really useful so the motherboard doesn't damage anything or no damage comes from the motherboard to all the parts here or vice versa. Over here, looks like we do have about 4 SATA ports, SATA cables right over here. You can actually see them. Pretty nice. Almost looks like a lot more, but it's actually just 4. Still, 4 is actually a really good number. Usually most motherboards actually come with 2. These little screws here appear to be related to the M2 slots, and also these little bumpers under here as well too. This actually looks a little bit like a little keychain strap. Can't really tell when I look at that again. Here, of course, is your manual. Pretty nice feeling to it. Very thin, and does come with a CD, DVD right over here with drivers and whatnot. Other brands have actually begun to introduce USB little thumb drives with their drivers on. I guess ASUS hasn't really hopped on that wagon at this time. Most of the drivers are usually downloaded online anyway, so that may or may not be useful to you in USB or CD form regardless. A couple little stickers here for you. Nice little silver color here. Kind of matches the color of the motherboard. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. Nice little postcard here, probably like thanking you for purchasing the card and also joining the club. Yep, you are now a member of the Elite Gaming Club. And some cable wraps over here. Here is your motherboard. Go ahead and take it out of the anti-static bag. As I mentioned before, that other piece of the cardboard does have the little Wi-Fi antenna. I'll go ahead and leave it in there. And let's get this open. Very solid board so far. Definitely a lot of weight to it. Almost looks like a little CPU cooler is actually here, but that's actually just the plastic that's protecting the pins and the actual socket itself. I'm gonna go ahead and just give you a quick look here. Quite a bit of weight to it. So this board does have the I/O backplate shield attached right onto this huge heatsink over here. You can actually see very thick copper over here with a little bit of color on it. Obviously this is basically gives you a little bit of a color thing here if you're going to be using a beige case and other parts as well too. This will probably go really well. A little bit of a silver beige color thing going on here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the board. Again, a little sticker here telling you have now joined the ROG Republic of Gamers. Full name of the motherboard there as well too, the D4, to indicate that this is actually a DDR4 version of the board. It's actually a very unique looking little piece over here. It says Supreme FX, referring to the built-in audio card that's actually here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the usual suspects down here on the bottom. Right over here looks like we do have the audio connection. So go ahead and connect your front panel connection for audio connections on the front of your case. Just a little bit further here, we do have a case fan connection. It looks like a 4-pin. And right next to that, to the right of it, is going to be two little 3-pin connections for RGB LED connections. There's actually more of these connections on the top of the board, and I'll get to that in just a moment. A little bit further here, you can actually see here, if it's focusing correctly, the TB header. That's basically for Thunderbolt connection, which is obviously becoming much more popular with motherboards these days. I'm actually really welcome to actually see that. So you do have that connection over there. To the right of that, looks like we have two traditional USB headers over here, USB 2 headers. So you can go ahead and connect your front USB ports if your case actually still has them. These actually have also been used to connect to some power supplies that have the little connection for monitoring, to monitor your, basically all the voltage and other stuff. Or if you actually have another device that actually may use this connection, you can definitely go ahead and connect it directly here. You definitely do have two of those. Further to the right of that, looks like we have two additional case fans, both 4 pins as well too. And a little bit further to the right, we have all the front panel connections for basically your LED lighting, your reset button, power button, reset button, everything, all those usual things. There's always a big amazing feeling to actually go ahead and look into the manual to connect those. Just before we actually go ahead and skip it, right up here we do have a little connection for TPM. This board does have some degree of TPM built in. Go ahead and take a look at that in the BIOS overview. But if you actually want to go ahead and connect the chip to this, that's your connection right there. Right over here, just before I actually skip over it, right over here on the left, looks like we do have a little sensor, and I believe that's actually your sensor for your case intrusion if you decide to use that. Not really popular these days. Many brands like Dell and Lenovo do have those installed built in. Moving along to the right side of the motherboard, we do have an additional 4-pin fan connection along with those 6 SATA ports I was mentioned earlier. So you have a total of 6 here. Obviously 2 of them or more of them may be disabled depending how many of the M2 NVMe slots you begin to use. If using only one of them should probably not cause a problem, but using additional ones, definitely refer back to the manual to see which of these ports will actually go ahead and be disabled. Moving further up on the motherboard, we do see this connection right over here for USB 3. Front panel connection, very, very popular and very useful these days. Some motherboards actually have 2 of these. Looks like this one actually only has 1, but don't fret. There is a reason for that. So here's your connection here if you do have some USB 3 front panel connections that you like to use. Moving a little further up, we do have the USB 3 Type-C connection over here. This obviously becoming much more popular, and we'll probably go ahead and start replacing these connections, at least to some degree, since more cases are now having front panel connections with USB Type-C. So this is a very, very useful connection over here. To the right of that, we have the 24-pin power supply connection, very standard. It's been in use for many, many, many years now, actually. And just above over here to the left of the power supply connection, we do have 4 DIMM slots over here. These are 4 DIMM slots for memory, DDR4 memory actually. As I mentioned earlier, there is a DDR5 variant of this particular motherboard. Basically looks exactly the same, except it's actually using DDR5 memory, so be sure to actually pick up the correct one. And it looks like we do have the connection on this side, the little clips here that actually move, but on the opposite side they are actually fixed. Looking at the top of the motherboard, just above the memory chip slots, we do have 2 additional LED RGB connections over here. Looks like one of them is 4-pin, the other is actually 3-pin, so you'll definitely be able to control these and the colors that they actually go ahead and use with ASUS software. Over here you can actually go ahead and see the entire socket that your CPU is actually going to be installed. It almost looks like this little cover here actually almost looks like there's already a CPU installed here. It's just basically a little piece of plastic that's actually intended to protect the pins, since the pins are actually built onto this particular motherboard. And of course around here you do see the entire heatsink that's stretching all across here, and all pretty much to the back plate area. There's a lot of stuff actually being kept cool under this particular area. And of course there's more heat sinks on the bottom part of the motherboard protecting the chipset piece itself, as well as more NVMe heat sinks as well too, that really just, the color chosen here is really just going to fit in the entire motherboard. To the right of that, or actually better to say to the left, if you're looking at this board correctly, you'll see the dual 8-pin CPU power connections over here. So obviously this board made for overclockers and enthusiasts alike. Does have the ability to go ahead and support just a standard CPU power connection, but also the additional one for overclocking or just really high power wattage CPUs that may be coming along using this particular socket and generation motherboard. Looking over here, looks like we do have two display connections. One's DisplayPort, one is HDMI. If you're planning to use a CPU with integrated graphics on it, these will be the connections you'll be using if you're not using a dedicated video card on this motherboard. We do have a number of USB connections here. Looks like about 8 or 9 of them, to be honest. Looks like these tended to be just regular USB 2 ports. If you're going to be flashing the BIOS with no CPU memory installed and just a USB thumbstick, this is going to be the USB port to actually use here. Looks like we do have little buttons here to clear the BIOS or clear the CMOS as well too. Little switch over here of a button. Looks like 4 USB 3 connections. One Type-C connection here. Looks like I am mistaken. There's actually an additional Type-C connection over here, giving you a total of about 10. An additional 2 USB ports here. And right above your Ethernet connection, which is actually 2.5G, becoming much more popular these days for game stream motherboards here. Much more popular and faster than your standard gigabit connection. Right over here, looks like we do have the little connections here for your Wi-Fi antenna that I mentioned earlier. And a little further to the right, we do have all the audio connections for your built-in sound card. Looks like the standard green here, and of course all the other connections here for your surround sound. This particular motherboard does not appear to have the optical connection that many other brands do, but all your connections are available here for surround sound. Looking at the board from this angle, we do obviously see all the heat sinks covering all the M2 slots over here. We have a total of 4, and all 4 of them are actually running at Generation 4 speeds. But mind you, if you're going to be using only one, be sure to actually use this particular ideal connection here, since it's directly being controlled by the CPU. So we do have one M2 slot down here, another one here, and it looks like dual M2 slots under this long little heat sink over here. A lot of stuff actually really keeping all the heat away from all these drives, so there's less and less throttling. This particular area here, we do have your X16 Generation 5 connection. This clip is really interesting. I don't even know how to push it back. Go ahead and take a look at that once the video card is installed. This is your ideal connection for your GPU. And down here, it looks like we do have another X16 PCI Express slot here as well too, if your standard clip. One little X1 right over here. So kind of looks like this board does have a bit of a lack of PCI Express slots for the most part, but mind you, you're likely going to be using only this one, and it's going to probably be one of those big GPUs anyway that are sucking up 2 or even 3 slots, which may explain why there's actually nothing here except for your CMOS battery. And of course, if you're going to be using a dedicated sound card or anything else, video capture card, you can always connect that over here, or even over here as well too. Very likely this is going to be the Intel 12th generation chipset board, one of the most solid ones I actually have my hands on, but there's definitely more, so I'll definitely be trying to do reviews on that. But so far, this is actually one of the most solid ones I've actually had my hands on fairly recently. Very well built board. All the connections appear to be in good positions. There are some board manufacturers just tossing connections wherever they want. The fan connections appear to be placed in pretty good places. There's probably even a fan connection I've missed here somewhere. There are actually 2 fan connections up here in this little area here that could be used for another fan connection, or even a pump connection, or your CPU cooler, which is that connection is actually on the top, so not to confuse those. But all out, very well built board. Really enjoying the color scheme here. That will probably really mix really well with computer cases in the silver or beige color. So if that's what you're actually looking for, you definitely do have this particular board as an option. So enough of looks. Let's go ahead and take a look at the performance, do a little bit of a BIOS review, and get this board installed into a case with all the goodies going with it. Hope everyone enjoyed that little build process I actually had there, and hope you enjoyed the video so far. Go ahead and shoot a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Support the channel. I'll definitely be doing some more reviews here on motherboards and other hardware as well too. Definitely go ahead and check out some other videos and motherboard videos alike as well too. So you can go ahead and see here, the board is booted up. I've actually popped into the BIOS here, and looks like everything's go okay. One thing I always like to check is the CPU temperature. There was actually one time I installed the CPU on one of these motherboards here, and the temperature was literally going up in 2 or 3 degrees Celsius increments almost like every 5 seconds, and I realized, okay, I did something wrong there. So definitely always keep an eye on that. You just want to make sure even after 5 minutes your temperature is not spiking to about 60 degrees Celsius, because if it did, that is a problem. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into some settings here. As with ASUS motherboards and many other brand motherboards as well too, there's usually 2 modes here, the advanced and so sort of easy mode here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the easy mode, which usually is set by default unless you go ahead and manually change it over to advanced mode. So let's go ahead and take a look at easy mode here. Very easily, you can actually, no pun intended, you immediately see some basic information here on your CPU, motherboard name, BIOS state as well too, the amount of memory chips you currently have installed. And down here, one of my little favorite options here, you do see all the fan speeds currently. Very funny little thing, you do see a little graphic of the fan spinning faster if the RPM is at a higher number. So let's go ahead and take a look here, some more CPU temperature and the current CPU core voltage as well too, something you can always adjust in the advanced mode when it comes to overclocking. Just below here you do see also storage information regarding all the drives that are currently connected. Right now I just have an Intel SSD 180 gigabytes installed. I was actually planning to install an NVMe drive on this particular board, but I decided not to. I had to actually go ahead and remove those heatsinks just so you have an idea a little earlier in the video, so you have an idea what exactly is under those heatsinks and how many slots there are in their positioning as well too, if that definitely can help you decide whether this is the motherboard for you too. BIOS version is actually stated up here. I will go ahead and update the BIOS to the latest version a little later, very shortly. CPU, looks like here CPU information, speed for your current CPU, and of course your memory here. Right now it's actually set to the generic 2133 DDR4 speed. I'm going to go ahead and pump it up to the 3000 speed that actually does support. Just below here, speaking of speeds, there's also the XMP option. You can actually go ahead and choose the profiles here if your memory chips does actually support that. A little bit below here you do have those fans again. Down here you have this little button called Q fan control. Once you actually go ahead and click on that, you'll be able to actually manipulate each fan, the CPU fan, all the chassis fans, and all the other fans connected to this particular board. You can actually do it on DC mode or PWM mode, but of course you do have the option to actually just do a manual mode as well too, and just pick the thresholds between the temperature and the fan speed as well too, if you prefer to. As actually an option I prefer to do myself. Over here on the right side, you do have this option here for AI overclocking option as opposed to doing it manually. Seems like this feature may be only used if the CPU you have is unlocked, so just keep that in mind here. Just below you do have the boot priority. You can actually go ahead and drag and drop all the drives here, so you can go ahead and select which drive will be your boot priority. Right now, obviously there's no OS installed on my SSD, so right now there's nothing showing up here. Otherwise you would see something that basically signifies your Windows 10 or Windows 11 installation here. Just below you have some options to go ahead and exit out, your save and exit, revert everything back to default settings. And over here on the right, you do have the option to go ahead and switch over to advanced mode as well too, or just hit the F7 key. Just above, since I went ahead and skipped this pretty quickly, on above you do have the option to go ahead and change your preferred language. You do have the option here to search for the setting you'd like to look for. So for example, if I wanted to search for memory speed, you can go ahead and select that here. Here's the RO connection as well too, that controls the LEDs on this particular board. I believe I did mention there's actually four connections there. You can actually, I believe there's 3 of them, 3 pins, and 1 4-pin as well. Here's another option for resize bar. Gives you more options up here as well. And of course mem test, which is very useful if you want to go ahead and test out your memory, see if there's any issues with it. This test usually really comes back really quick if there's actually any errors associated with the memory chips you currently have on the board that may be causing or giving you some BSODs. That's pretty much it in a nutshell for the easy mode. So let's go ahead and click on F7 or click on down here to switch over to advanced mode. Probably the setting I'll be using more myself, and if you're going to be doing some overclocking, a lot of changes, this will definitely be for you as well. Immediately on the right side, you do see the same information. for your CPU, memory, and some other options regarding the capacity, core voltage ratio, and other stuff like that. On the top here, we do have some different options on the menu. We do have the same options up here as before. We do have this My Favorite option, and of course this Q Fan option as well too. Q Fan obviously does give you the option here again to go ahead and select those fan temperature thresholds. If you select on My Favorite over here, you can actually go ahead and select all the options you like to keep as a favorite, if particularly settings that you use quite often. So this is actually very useful if these settings you like to go ahead and go back to fairly easy, as opposed to browsing around and finding the same setting again. Once you actually go ahead and select which favorites you like to keep, you can go ahead and click on My Favorites over here, and you'll see all the options selected in that little list a little bit earlier that will now appear in this area here, which is actually quite useful. This is really good if you're going to be basically playing around, do a little trial and error on some settings here, particularly even overclocking if you like as well too. You'll be able to access all those settings here immediately. Moving on to the next button here called Main, you do have some basic details on your motherboard. Obviously the BIOS date, the build date, which is looks like towards the end of 2021. There may be an actual updated there, so I'll definitely take a look at that and update as needed. Go ahead and select your date and time, your language again, and some other settings here. Underneath here, it looks like you do have a security button to put a password for your administrator. You can actually go ahead and lock down some settings on this board if you choose to do so. If you do not have the administrator password, I believe you'll only be able to just take a look and read settings, basically kind of like locking down your Windows system, and you can't do anything in Device Manager. We now have a setting here called AI Tweaker. And over here is basically where you actually be setting up a lot of overclocking settings or just custom settings and whatnot here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and you can actually go ahead and select on DRAM frequency to change the memory speed to whatever speed you believe it actually should be set. So I'll just set it to 3000, since obviously these are 3000 memory chips. Below here you do have some other options such as ratio, and I believe you actually have some voltage settings as well. Now, mind you, overclocking is a very delicate process and can be potentially dangerous to your board and your CPU or even your memory chips. So just be careful to know exactly what you're doing here before attempting to make any changes. You'll be a little disappointed if something doesn't work out or your system stops loading and does not boot up anymore. Obviously, you do have the option to reset the CMOS and put everything back here to regular default settings. But, you know, it's just an unfortunate feeling when a setting here doesn't work. You do have some options for voltage down here, more CPU functions as well. So definitely be very careful when switching all these settings here. Clicking on Advanced, looks like you do have some options for the motherboard itself, such as turning on device stuff like your Wi-Fi and other options that are actually on the board. Clicking on this option here, you do have some options for the PCI Express and some other options as well. CPU configuration just gives you a lot of information here. And of course, some other options such as turning off hyperthreading or the virtualization as well. System agent looks like it gives you some more options over here. And of course, we do have some other options for PCI Express and related as well too. Some options here for your M.2 storage devices and slots. And some other options here regarding your SATA plugs in terms of being hot plug option. Most of them are actually set by disabled by default. So just keep an eye on that as well too if you plan to use a hot plug option for your SATA ports. Here's an interesting connection here regarding your Thunderbolt configuration. Trusted computing, this is basically TPM options, which is usually enabled by default. So if you're going to be installing Windows 11 or another operating system that does depend on TPM, or you're just going to be using it by default anyway, here are your options in this area. Another option here for PCI subsystem settings as well. And use USB configuration settings here, legacy mode USB support, and other options. Network stack configuration. Scrolling down here, there are additional settings. Let's go ahead and go back here. NVMe configuration as well too. There's no drive connected here, so the options are currently not present, but you will definitely see more options if you do have one installed. HDD smart information, very useful tool in case your hard drive is experiencing an eventual failure at some point. This can definitely give you the heads up. APM configuration, some power options in this area here. And onboard devices configuration as well. This is where you can actually go ahead and enable or disable certain options like LAN, USB audio, and of course some other options you'd like to go ahead and enable or disable. Down here, it looks like you have one final option regarding Intel Rapid Storage technology. I do not have an Intel drive currently connected here that supports this feature, or not fully. So obviously, looks like nothing really shows up here. As mentioned, no disk currently connected to the system, despite actually having an Intel SSD connected. Interesting little thing there. Moving along here, we do have the other option for monitor. And obviously here you can see some temperature monitoring options here. Obviously temperatures did take a moment to load there, but here we are. And you see these options here. Going back one shot, we do have the fan monitor speed, but a little more traditional way to actually go ahead and control your fan speeds here. You do have the option to obviously ignore fan speeds here if you choose to do so. Voltage and current monitor, so this can obviously go ahead and alter the current voltages. This take a moment there to load up as well. And Q fan configuration, again, very similar option to actually go ahead and control the thresholds here as well too. A little bit old-fashioned way as well, just some options here for that. Chassis intrusion, if you want to use that little monitor connection there for to see if there's anyone's trying to open your case. And CPU temperature LED switch as well, which is currently set to enabled at this time. Further to the right, we do have the option for boot. We can go ahead and select which are you going to be your boot configuration as well. Obviously, go ahead and select secure boot if that's an option you're looking for. Very ideal for Windows 11 if you plan to use Windows 11. And CSM module here as well, if you'd like to go ahead and have that enabled. Another option here is tool. Looks like some options specifically for this particular motherboard that ASUS likes to go ahead and give you. So definitely go ahead and check out these options here. Here, of course, is your flash utility if you want to go ahead and update the BIOS on this board to a later, more recent version. And if I recall correctly, here's another option called My ASUS. This is actually connected with the app that will allow you to actually go ahead and monitor certain settings off the app. Some people have mentioned this may be a little intrusive, but you definitely do have the option if you like to go ahead and use that. And the app is right there. Some other options, we do have that mem test option here again, which you can also go ahead and test by clicking on that other option that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And last but not least, clicking on the exit button, we do have the option to go ahead and save all our changes, discard them, load up basically the optimized defaults, or just go ahead and just exit the BIOS over here and continue with boot up. So it's basically a good overview of the entire advanced portion of the BIOS setup over here. Obviously, go ahead and click on the date up here in time. You can go ahead and make changes to the date and time, of course. So I want to go ahead and actually update the BIOS here, just share with the entire process with you guys as well too. So let's go ahead and find that little option here. Go to Tool. Here we do have the Easy Flash utility. I did go ahead and plug in the little USB drive with the latest firmware version. So let's go ahead and process that here. Go ahead and click on my little thumb drive, and you'll immediately see here's the BIOS version here. It's immediately telling you that to back up any BitLocker recovery keys and whatnot, also suspend BitLocker, which is probably a good idea, especially if you're actually changing hardware. Little hint there. And let's go ahead and click on yes. I'm going to read the file. Seems like the mouse stopped moving, and now it's asking us, do you really want to update the BIOS? Version 1201 from February 17th. Fairly recent little BIOS over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on yes. And this should probably take anywhere between 1 to 5 minutes. All right, here we are. It looks like the board BIOS has finished updating. The system has actually turned itself off. It's now booting right back up. I'm guessing it'll probably be just a few more seconds before I can actually re-enter the BIOS and just show you the updated BIOS itself, which I'm pretty sure is probably going to be very, almost like 95%, 99% similar or the same as before. Probably just a little, couple little bug fixes and improvements for CPU support. So let's go ahead and wait here. I'm going to hit the delete key. Looks like it's still updating LED firmware, so I won't touch anything right now. That's a new one. Looks like it's rebooting itself once more. And once we're here, I will go ahead and hit the delete key and re-enter the BIOS. Now, usually BIOS updates are very harmless. Many years ago, you would only really have to do it unless it really just resolves a critical issue that you have actually had or facing. Probably the first time I ever updated the BIOS was on a Pentium 2, Pentium 3 motherboard, and I actually updated because it was not recognizing my 40 gigabyte parallel hard drive. Yeah, this is quite some time back. So I updated the BIOS, and I previously had a 6.4 gigabyte that it came with. After the BIOS update, the 40 gigabyte was recognized and was working as intended. So that was actually my first experience updating the firmware of a motherboard. Obviously, some BIOS updates are actually processed almost through, I've actually seen it being processed through Windows updates these days. In the workplace, some time back, I saw an HP computer literally processing a BIOS update on its own, which... I have my own opinion about that, but not something I want to actually have Windows Update do on its own. So, but you can definitely see how more common BIOS updates are these days. Just to give you a little bit of a level there. So here we are. Looks like we have rebooted right back into the system itself, and immediately you do see the new version of the BIOS over here. BIOS build date does mention February 17, 2022. Very recent over here as well. So you can definitely go ahead and browse around, see if there's any new tweaks and setups they've actually introduced. There was one little CPU feature that I believe was mentioned in a comment in one of my videos previously, and there may or may not actually be in this particular firmware here, even though it's been mentioned that maybe it was actually removed, but who knows. So if you're looking for some stuff here, or I did actually read on the notes related to this update firmware, that it did actually improve performance on CPUs with the little F letter at the end. So just something to keep in mind as an example there. Just taking a look here at the board itself. Just trying to see where all the LEDs are. Really nice over here. You can actually notice that. And some a little bit coming out from the side. I don't see any coming out from the bottom. You can see a little bit. Could just be a little bit of reflection there. And obviously the memory chip's having its own LEDs there. So very quiet board for the most part. Very nice. It really does fit this Be Quiet 5000 case here with all the color scheme and whatnot. Obviously if you want to actually change this to like a different color as well too, and maybe even the CPU cooler, it'll probably look a lot nicer. I've even seen memory chips looking like that as well too. So a lot of options here if you want to really just color scheme fans also. I can actually go on the entire case component list here and actually just give you everything that's available in different colors. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching this whole video. I really hope you enjoyed the build process, the BIOS overview, and all the other little details I want to hand through in about this wonderful piece of hardware here. Definitely go ahead and shoot a like and subscribe if you definitely enjoyed this video, found it useful. Go ahead and support our channel here as well too. And of course, if you have any comments, questions about this motherboard before you buy it, after you bought it, or just any little issues you run into, absolutely let me know. I've been more than happy to actually be able to assist people with any questions they may have on other motherboard reviews I've actually done. More than happy to actually assist you on this one here as well too. Thanks again for watching everyone, and as always, stay safe. Take care.